Good afternoon, YouTubers, and I hope you've had a good Easter. I certainly have. I've had a weekend off, which has been quite nice. Just had a few clients this morning, but I've got some time, so I thought I would do another video to help you to liberate your minds. So I watch a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of books, and I'm constantly on the lookout for trends and interesting patterns that are forming in individuals and in society as a whole. And I was just listening to a podcast it was about lots of things, but one of the areas within that podcast was all about dating and how it's become incredibly unhealthy, and how people's habits have completely changed. And for the first time in history, there are actually more people single or not having sex, basically. And it was quite alarming, right? Some of these statistics were quite shocking. Like 50% of men have actually stopped looking. They've stopped interacting. They've stopped even trying to get dates. And that's not like they're now looking for just sex. No, they've just stopped trying. And what they're doing instead is just gaming. They're on their computers, they're drinking, they're taking drugs, they're just hanging out with each other. They're not really engaging in the process whatsoever. And I've actually posted, I think it was a meme today, showing that when men, have no purpose or they feel insecure or insignificant, they actually just dose themselves with all kinds of different kinds of pleasure. They just get lost in porn and drugs and gaming and escapism, which is why companies like Netflix and these other companies are doing so well. It's because, in fact, the gaming industry is the biggest it's ever been, and that's because they've just checked out. And 50% of the men that are dating are not looking for a committed relationship. And that's either because they are avoidant and they are frightened of getting into a committed relationship because they've been treated badly, or because of a fear of rejection, or it will be because they are of a certain status, which I'm going to talk about how that comes about in just a minute in the dating sort of world, and therefore they're spoilt for choice, so they don't want to just stick with one person, which isn't ideal either. And the stats for women, aren't much better, in a sense that, it's been an interesting time in the sense that women, for the first time in history, by age 30, there are more women who don't have kids and are single than they are with kids. And that's kind of amazing, isn't it, when you consider it? But of course, it makes sense when you consider that a lot more women now are career-minded and driven, and they go into higher education. In fact, there are more women in universities now. There are about 3 women to every 1 man. And they are higher achievers. They are now actually, even though you kind of hear these things about women not being paid as much, that might be in the kind of highest positions. But when it comes to, in general, women are now generally paid more than men, at least 1,000 more or something like that. And because of that, and because women have I can't remember exactly what the terminology is, but there is actually a way that women look for a man as a potential suitor who is either equal to or slightly better off in terms of finances or status, in terms of their job situation or title. And therefore, because a lot of men aren't living up to that, there is only a small proportion of men in that bracket. And therefore, and because a lot of the men have kind of, dropped out the scene completely, there's only a small pool of men who fit the bill in terms of their status, their earnings, and all the other things, their height, all of the rest of it. And therefore, it comes down to the fact that women are going after the guys that are the ones who aren't committing, and they're treating them badly, and they're players and they're playing the game. And then the women, of course, become disillusioned with the whole dating industry, and they tend to generalize then, and there's a lot of trauma there. So, and it's got to a point where, men are now starting focus groups online. There's even a name for these things now. They're calling themselves incels, where they go into these help groups where there are men that want to attract women, but they actually feel like they can't do that anymore because they can't live up to the standard, which is kind of crazy. So why is this important? Well, because, it's now proven that in order to live a long and healthy life, the biggest factor to avoiding various health concerns or addiction and all kinds of other things is to have healthy relationships, both friendships and also intimate relationships, because technically that is just a closer relationship, isn't it? It's got some intimacy in it, and it's very nurturing, it's very healthy to have that. But of course, with that breaking down and being single, I mean, the trend, if women continue the way that they are, there is a stat that now says, and there was a survey done, I think by Morgan Stanley or whatever they're called, that by the time we get to 2040, there will be more single women without children between the age of 25 to 45. I think 40% of women will be single and no kids. Wow. And that is quite frightening in a sense. So what's causing that? Again, it's the disillusionment. So being a therapist, I obviously see quite a lot of people that have come out the other end of this. And it's interesting, really, because what I tend to get, so if we talk about women, what I tend to get with women are the ones that have kind of gone through the mill and been completely demoralized and treated badly and traumatized by all the players and the men and all the rest of it, or they are women that are coming out of marriages where the men have refused to evolve. They're still who they are. They're happy who they are. They don't talk, they don't communicate. And the women during lockdown and various other things, they're into personal development. They're starting to work on themselves. They're realizing they want better than that. And of course, the men won't change. So the gap gets bigger. And then eventually the women break away. Men, on the other hand, I only see part of the men. I usually see the men that got left behind, who are now broken and not really sure what to do next, and they now can't commit to another woman, and they're very depressed. But what I don't see are the men who've given up, because they've given up. If they cared, they would come to see me and they're like, how can I improve? How can I work on myself? How can I find a partner? Obviously, I can't find a partner, but I can help them find the way to boost their confidence and their self-worth and all the rest of it. But they've stopped trying. And that's why watching this podcast was a little bit of a shock to me. I mean, in a sense, I kind of knew some of it, but I didn't realize how many men, like 50% of men, have actually given up. And I kind of thought about it, and what kind of made me laugh a little bit was I'm part of that statistic. And it's not because I've given up. What I did, and this is what I would suggest that a lot of those men do, and that's the aim of this video, I suppose, is to kind of say to guys, giving up isn't really helpful, or joining focus groups just kind of talking about the problem in a kind of victim mentality way, like, I can't find a woman, I can't live up to women. It's like, well, that's living at effect, isn't it? That's like saying, this is how it is, there's nothing I can do about it, and now I'm just going to moan about it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's no sympathy there. I mean, I've been single for, I don't know, 5 years, something like that. But that's been by choice. And the reason for that was because A, I changed careers, and B, I wanted to focus on my career and and then health, right? I wanted to sort out the physical and the mental and really kind of get myself into a situation where I was able to be steady, stable, and ready to kind of do that. And I'm kind of at a point now where I am ready to go back out there. And I've just sort of looked at some dating apps and stuff like that. And that's why these kind of stats are kind of interesting. I'm like, wow, I've kind of come back to the dating industry platform, whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of like, what has happened? Like, it's got to a point now where, you know, it's like a shopping list, and and we all know that when there is a lot of choice, it's become that point where you become addicted to the app, and it's less about trying to find a partner and more about the dopamine hit or the next thing I might be missing out on. So there are other factors involved as well, and some people get addicted to the dopamine of meeting new people and dating new people and the chase, and they don't really get involved in that. So it's, there's more to it. It's a kind of a complex situation, but the statistics, are quite concerning. So I suppose my message today is really about, if you have been someone, like if you're a woman that's gone through the mill and you're feeling very disillusioned, and either that or you've come out of a marriage, my advice is to actually take a break, because if you're looking for a relationship to give you self-worth or give you what you feel is missing, you're never going to find that within a relationship unless you've done the work within yourself. And I've seen that time and time again, because what you tend to attract is either the very thing that's got you to where you are in the first place, because unconsciously to most people, they tend to end up dating the same characteristics of their parents. But also, if you have accumulated a lot of trauma and hurt and beliefs and are lacking, like self-esteem and stuff like that, then you want to get that sorted before you go back out there. Because otherwise, it's not just about this person you're going on a date with, it's all of the people that you've been hurt by that will be influencing your decisions, and there'll be a lot of unconscious wounds that are being triggered here. And you can get into that situation where you start to label men as, untrustworthy or users or players or whatever it is. And we're not all like that, right? And you'll be pushing people away, or you'll be looking and searching for, and you will find the signs that you've heard of self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, that's because your reticular activating system, your filtration system, will be looking for that, and it will find it every time and just disregard everything else. And for the men, it's the same thing. Like, it's if you've been in a marriage that's broken down and the woman has left you, then the tendency is to then give up, or, get bitter and twisted and, say, well, I'm never going to get into a relationship again, or I'll never let anyone be like that. But actually, it's about owning it a little bit, and just think that, a lot of the time as well, women don't just leave. They tend to start saying things at least a year or two in advance, and they tend to give people a chance, especially if they've got kids. I know about 5 or 6 different friends of mine that are kind of going through this situation. It wasn't like they didn't speak up and say, it's just that men actually don't know how, especially of a certain generation. They don't know what to do. They don't like to talk about it. They don't like to talk about their feelings or kind of admit they're at fault, because that's weak, all of these kinds of things. So my advice to those men are to come and see a therapist before they leave, right? Because what tends to happen is they bury their head in the sand, and they say, and they might be busy with work and all the rest of it, but they'll do one of two things. They'll either bury their head in the sand, or they'll say they'll change, and then they will revert back to everything they've ever done before. And eventually the women leave. They give up trying. And you know, especially when there are kids involved, like that's usually what really influences the woman to really make an effort and to try and get things sorted. So what I would say is don't if you don't know how, then seek help. Like for the first time in history, like it's kind of acceptable at this point, to not be okay, to admit you're not okay, to get some help. And it doesn't have to be like, all touchy feely, talky, stuff about feelings. You don't need to necessarily do that, especially with the kind of therapies that someone like myself does, where we just resolve the triggers, the traumas, the beliefs, the things at root cause at an unconscious level. Because when the feeling changes and it doesn't happen anymore, it doesn't drive those behaviors or those thoughts that you're having, and this idea of just hoping it will go away, or burying in your head in the sand, or projecting, being defensive, blaming the other person, especially, and then all the way up to the end when they then leave and they'll say, this is your fault, how could you do this to me? And that's it. Everybody needs relationships, connections. They know that most people that, that are labeled as addicts, and I don't like to use that word because, it's not an identity, it's a behavior, it's a coping mechanism. The people that tend to go back and fall off the wagon are the ones that don't have purpose or connection. And so having those connections in your life, friends or relationships, are the things that give us the chemicals and the stability that we need to thrive and to feel like life is worth living. Just like old people tend to die quickly when their partner passes away, or they spend large amounts of time on their own. You're more likely to survive till you're older if you've still got family connections or a partner with you. So hopefully that's opened people's eyes a little bit. It certainly opened my eyes, and encourages people to not wait until things get to a point where you get so disillusioned that you just stop trying. I think we all need to kind of maybe, that the thing about the internet and phones and tablets and all the rest of it is, it's like the world is more connected than it's ever been, and yet it's more disconnected. We're having relationships more with our phones than we are with real people. And people are actually, and they've said this as well, young people are not developing social skills. And it's got worse after the pandemic because people are kind of almost frightened to go back out into society. They've got comfortable, and, they've actually now worked out as well the statistics that a lot of men don't have a single close friend, like none, right? And that is really quite difficult because they literally, all they do is work and sit in front of the TV on their own, and that's it. And it's no wonder they're depressed, right? So connection is important, even if it's just with members of your own sex. Go to meetups. Like there's a site called Meetup, right, where you can go and join some hobbies, join a football team, do a fitness class, like get back out there. Even if you're not dating, call people up. And if you're gonna, have Zoom calls and stuff, and I know we don't like that, it's kind of, I've heard it from a lot of people now that even though people have now gone back into the workplace, that they're actually just on Zoom or Teams for all meetings. So they don't leave their desk. So even when they're there in the building with everybody in the building, they don't actually connect to meet in a meeting room. They still work on the screens. And so they never feel like they're having a break from the screens and actually having human connection. And it's causing all kinds of issues. Like I can honestly say, I have never been busier. So that's good for business, but it just shows how much mental health is going down the pan, and how productivity and disconnection through technology has now reached a point where it's unhealthy. It's not looking good. When they talk about the metaverse, when people are going to just be hooked in all the time, it's not going to end well. So get some support before it gets that far. Go out and connect with people. Have a go at speed dating, right? It's actually quite fun. You're only with each person for a couple of minutes. It's better to actually throw yourself into it and be prepared to kind of make a fool of yourself a little bit, because they've worked out now that, what most people do is they say, I will work on myself, and when I feel ready, I'll go back out there and start dating, or go to like speed dating or on dates or whatever it is. But, statistically, and understanding how the human brain and body work, you're not going to do it because you're never going to feel ready, right? That's a fact. We're wired for survival. So you're always going to find that your body will talk you out of it. So you've kind of got to just go for it, and you've just got to feel the fear and do it anyway, right? Famous quote there. And, it's never as bad as you think it is. And the confidence muscle comes from actual experience, right? If you're going to try and get confident and then go out there, you'll never go out there, because confidence comes through actual action, taking action. So start small. If you don't want to go, speed dating, just join a group where there's no pressure on you, right? You can just be in the background doing a keep fit thing, or a football team, or, whatever it might be, just so you can be in the group. And as your confidence starts to build, maybe contribute to the conversation and start to build up from there. But connection is the key. And if you have some unconscious baggage from your past, or because you've been through the mill on the dating apps, come and see me or someone like me, and we will get you back on track, clear the past. So it's just about what's happening in this conversation, rather than about all the different incidents and people that you've been through the mill with. Because that's the problem, again, in marriages and relationships. When you have an argument, if you've let these things fester and build up, it's never about that one thing. It's about all the arguments. And that tends to build up into that final moment where you both then leave the relationship. So I hope that's been helpful. Have a great rest of your Easter bank holiday weekend, and I'll see you all again very soon.